Ajnanatimirandasya jnana shalakaya chakshurunmilitam yena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurange Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye. Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Ya Kundayendu Tushara Hara Javala, Ya Shubhravastra Vrita, Ya Veena Varadandha Mandita Kara, Ya Shveta Padmasana, Ya Brahma Chuto Shankara Pratibhi Vere Sada Vandita. Samam Patu Saraswati Bhagavati Buddhi Pradham Sharadhe, Buddhi Pradham Sharadhe. Gurudev. So today we have to talk about Dharma, but in an advanced way. And so what that means is that I'm going to try to compare it to an extent Western philosophy, but also to link it to observable changes that we can see in the development of society as we know it, and therefore the way that we think of ourselves and the way that we think about society as a whole, because Dharma is not just a random belief. If it is real, then it actually is completely fundamental to everything that we do. Because either things have meaning inherently or they don't, and that's the conversation that we have to explore. Because if they do, then we live life one way, and if they don't, then we can live life a different way. And so it has a lot of consequence to the way we construct life. Okay? So let's begin, and I'll work with some of the basics that we've for sure already covered in other classes about Dharma, maybe in devotee courses, maybe in other things. And then we'll gradually build up to the more complex questions. So firstly, what is Dharma? Dharma is, in simple terms, the underlying natural order of the universe. And so in Hinduism, this is something we call Rita. So Rita is that there's an order, a cosmic order. And so Dharma is what the entities, the beings, animate and inanimate, that exist within this universe have. So Rita is the cosmic law, the cosmic order. Dharma is what everything inside that universe has. So a purpose in that cosmic law, in that cosmic plan, so to speak. The word Dharma itself is derived from dharana, which literally means to support or to maintain. So that which supports something is its Dharma. So for example, if we look at our own belief system, we say that the purpose, the Dharma of a soul is to cultivate a relationship with God. So okay, if that is our purpose, that is our Dharma, let's go one level lower. How do I maintain, how do I support that purpose? That is also my Dharma. And so Dharma is a multifaceted word that can be used in different contexts. So for example, my sadhana. Doing my sadhana supports my purpose of being in a relationship with God. Therefore, to do my sadhana is also my Dharma. So already there we see how Dharma, depending on the use case, can be used at different levels. So Dharma is the very purpose of a thing, but it can also be a specific behavior, a specific action that is dharmic. Yeah, so this is a dharmic action or a dharmic thought. Why? Because it supports my overall Dharma, which is my purpose, my direction. Okay? And again, this is something that we're going to evolve and break down as we develop the concepts. Now, there is probably no other word in the Shastra, in the holy scriptures of Hinduism, that is as widely used as Dharma in a variety of contexts. So when we talk about Dharma in Shastra, we can be talking about it as meaning virtue, so just good qualities. We can talk about it as meaning purpose. We can talk about it as meaning righteousness. Now, that already sort of implies that there is such a thing as an objective right and an objective wrong, which we'll get to in a minute. Religion, for example, even the word religion is often translated as dharma in the Shastras. And so it is very difficult to pin it down, but what we can sort of summarize it as is that Dharma as an umbrella term encompasses duties, so what you have to do, your rights, laws, in a society built upon principles of Sanatana Dharma, okay, so not any society, conduct, behavior, virtues, qualities, and I'm summarizing this as a right way of living. So Dharma is a right way of living, which therefore encompasses all of those principles, which is your behavior, the qualities you're supposed to develop to enjoin to that behavior, how the society as a whole is supposed to be constructed, and what everyone is supposed to be doing within that society. All of that, to one degree or another, is Dharma. And so you can see how multifaceted the term is. Yeah? Now, I've put this forward as the fourth bullet point on this slide because I believe it's the most important point moving forward for the rest of the lecture, which is, it is often used in the place of religion, duty, or righteousness, as I've already mentioned. However, purpose is perhaps the most complete definition for the sake of analyzing the principle of Dharma. We have to pin it down somewhere specifically. I cannot break down a principle that can have 20 different meanings. Right? So I'm going to pin Dharma down for the remainder of the lecture today as meaning purpose. So purpose means an inherent purpose. Inherent means that it is not attributed. Nobody gives you that purpose. It's natural to you. Okay? So it is not an interpretive purpose. It is not a purpose taken on by choice. It is something which is inbuilt into you, programmed into you from your very existence. This is what I'm defining Dharma as for the sake of the lecture, okay? Inherent purpose, okay? And so in order for me to really dive into the idea that we perhaps, I'm not saying it's for sure, we perhaps have inherent purpose, I have to consider its opposite. So the opposite of Dharma would be relativism. And relativism is the idea that nothing is objectively true. There is no statement of fact. This is truth. Everything is instead dependent on human minds or on perception. It's a matter, therefore, of opinion. So therefore, I'm going to build this case step by step. Relativism stands in opposition to the notion of Dharma. Nothing holds inherent meaning. So if Dharma means something holds inherent purpose or inherent meaning, relativism is saying that it holds no inherent meaning. So let me give you a very basic example to start this case. Take the example of a knife. You make a knife, whoever designs a knife and builds a knife, it is constructed, in my estimation, with an inherent purpose. The inherent purpose of the knife is to cut, to stab, right? But somebody may grab that knife and deny that inherent purpose and say, this is simply an object for me to attribute purpose to as I see fit. So instead of using this knife only for cutting or stabbing, as someone may claim that it is his inherent purpose, I'm going to use it for spreading butter. Yeah? I make a new purpose for it, so to speak. So I'm therefore attributing the Dharma to that knife. I have decided that the purpose of that knife is to spread butter. So the knife does not have an inherent purpose that I cannot change, right? Now, that's an example of a knife. It's a very simple object. It is not conscious. It doesn't think for itself. And so it is easy for us to argue one way or another. It becomes more complex when we come to human beings, right? Life in general. And so this is the level of complexity that we're going to have to scale gradually. But at least you understand the two opposites, yeah? So inherent purpose, attributed purpose. Therefore, if something already has meaning, something's meaning can be essentially created by yourself, by a human mind. That's an important distinction to draw at this point as we continue to progress. So therefore, in the idea of relativism, everything can be interpreted, reimagined, and purpose is ultimately subjective. There is no objective natural reality. I'm going to give you working definitions for objective versus subjective. objective true things are things that are not dependent on a human mind for them to have reality. Okay? So for example, for me to say, oh, that rose outside is beautiful, the beauty of the rose is entirely subjective because it is dependent on my perception of beauty, right? So subjectivity is something which is dependent on perception, opinion, subjectiveness. Objective facts hold their meaning independent of any human mind. So whether I give an opinion or not, that thing will have the same factual description, for example. So beauty is not an objective thing. Generally, we can agree with this, right? Because beauty is not an objective thing independent of opinion. Different people find different things beautiful. Fair enough? So I find a series of things very beautiful that I know in my real life other people don't find beautiful. Now, I think those people are crazy. But again, that is not objective. That is subjective. I think they are crazy. They are not objectively crazy. Maybe they are, but it's not the point. The point of the example is to demonstrate the difference between objectivity and subjectivity. Clear? So objectivity in this case is something that has inherent meaning or can be spoken of in factual terms independent of a human mind. Now, even me saying that already implies contradiction because we're speaking about it. Yeah? So think of it in a vacuum without speech and without minds giving opinions and interpretation on it, and then we have something theoretically objective. Whether it really exists or not is something we're going to debate as we go along the slides. And subjective in this case, as I said, dependent on opinion. Okay? So therefore, the idea that there is no objective natural reality, what does that actually mean as a theory? It means that we cannot make any claims, we cannot make any statements that are universally true. If there is no objective reality, now please make a distinction between objective reality and objective truth. These are two different things. I'll explain the difference in a second. So if I can't say anything is universally true, for example, if I say the grass is green, okay, even if that experience is shared by the vast majority of human beings, there are still people that are not going to see that grass is green because they have a different eyesight, for example, right? So it is still not an objective statement that is universally applicable. So therefore, the idea of an objective natural reality is disputed by some. Now, this is best characterized, the idea of relativism, by the postmodern ideology that emerged as a Western response to the 17th century Enlightenment period. So I'm going to have to give a little bit of a history context here of how we get there and why these ideas emerged. And it is important. You might think, what has this got to do with Sanatana Dharma? It has plenty to do with Sanatana Dharma in the 21st century. Because we are trying to live out ancient Vedic principles, but we're doing so with minds that are conditioned by the development of thought in the place where we live and exist right now. Because we've all educated here, we all interact with people that have been educated here, primarily, and therefore that means that a lot of the subconscious ways that we interpret reality and the value structures that we have are built up by these ideas that I'm going to present to you gradually in a historical sort of presentation, okay? So if we look here in the West, specifically in Europe, okay, we have, of course, the idea of monarchies and the idea of the Catholic Church being two predominantly leading thought organizers. Let's put it like this, right? So the monarchies would essentially be a hierarchy of power where the monarch, the king or queen, would dictate the values and behaviors and ideals that a society that they are the monarchs of should operate under, right? So almost like a replica of religious thought, which is God dictates the way we should live, we follow. Yeah? So in those times, society, the city of man, quote unquote, was supposed to be a mirror of the city of God. So you have the all-knowing, almighty God giving instruction, the rest follow. Here on earth, the same system was there. We have the monarch, who is the representative of God, gives the instruction, the rest follow. Okay? The problem with this is that revealed knowledge, which this is what it essentially is not subject to reason, to rationality. It's just accepted on authority, right? So the king says, do this, and you do it. Why? Because the king said so, not because it makes sense to do it, okay? Now, these hierarchies of instruction and power have existed in different ways, different times, different places. Rebellions to this have also existed, different places, different times, different contexts, okay? Religiously, that also existed. For example, the Catholic Church and its dogmas. So a dogma was something that the Catholic Church, in its authority, mandated to be true. Therefore, anyone who is a subscribing believer of the Catholic Church, especially in those times, would have to subscribe to that belief, whether it was a rational belief or not. That is irrelevant. The rationality and reasonability of it was an irrelevance prior to perhaps Thomas Aquinas. We're talking maybe 11th century onwards, okay? So Catholic thought for a long time was mandated, Catholic belief was mandated by the persons who held positions of authority, and if you subscribe, you simply accept, whether you understand reasonability, logic, or not, okay? So what we have is, if we take, for example, from 16th, 17th century, we have the end of what is, or the quick rise and end of the scientific era. And the scientific era is when we talk about people like Galileo, Newton, Copernicus. So these are people that made huge breakthroughs scientifically. And what they were able to do is basically eradicate 90% of the churches and the monarchies' statements of truth prior to that era. So for example, people are dying, right? Big plague. Why? Because we're sinning too much. Yeah, that's the answer. We're all sinners, and therefore God is punishing us. Scientific developments show us that no, this is a virus, or this is bacteria, or this is whatever it may be. That's what's actually happening, right? And we may say, great, that is an evolution in the scientific field. It shows us a degree of truth, but it also has another consequence. It kills another claim to truth, right? So, for example, chemistry, to some extent, kills alchemy, right? Astronomy kills astrology, to some extent, yeah? And so this is the scientific revolution of sorts. And as a result of the scientific revolution, there was a very big socio-political revolution, which we call the Enlightenment period. So the Enlightenment period followed the scientific revolution, and the principle of the Enlightenment period was basically this. If we no longer assume the statements of truth that we were raised upon by, for example, the church to be true, and we do away with them, how then do we perceive truth? And so it was the rise of reason, the strength of reason, logic, okay? So let us, through reason and analysis and the scientific endeavor, seek to know reality. And by doing so, they arrived at many conclusions, many very famous philosophers who are instrumental to the Enlightenment movement. John Locke, Immanuel Kant, and many others, okay? Now, there is a very important point that is to be made here. So John Locke, who was one of these influential philosophers, he makes one big claim about the human mind, about humans in general, that our minds at point of birth are tabula rasa, which means a blank slate. Yeah? Blank slate means they're not conditioned in any way. There isn't original sin, for example, as was taught for centuries. Neither is there conditioned goodness or conditioned badness in any of us inherently. We are essentially to be molded by our choices, decisions, and to an extent, society around us, okay? Now, that obviously has severe consequences. If that is to be believed, it means that we are living in a situation where belief in the Abrahamic God becomes more complicated. I'll give you a reason why. If there is no such thing as original sin, what are we trying to overcome? What is it inside of us that causes us to be separated from God with a tendency towards evil? Okay. Secondly, if there is no inherent conditioning towards neither goodness nor badness, then what explains the clear differentiation or the clear unfairness that we see in human birth, human experience? So some people are born into richness, some people are born into poverty, right? What accounts for that injustice? Well, scientifically, random chance. It depends who you're born to, where, when, etc. It's nothing divinely organized, right? But for us, we have our own belief systems. Of course, we talk about karma, right? Now, karma is something that I'm introducing here as a challenge to this idea of the tabula rasa, of the clean slate, okay? Karma, within our belief system, dictates that you are born with a whole series of imprints from your previous lives. conditioning you in particular directions. So therefore, there is no such thing as the clean slate when you are born. You are already conditioned a certain way. Yeah? So therefore, the importance, the weight of choice, decisions, is obviously very different in one scenario versus in the other. If I'm already conditioned a certain way, right, then the choices that I make throughout my life have more or less impact versus if I'm not conditioned in any way and I'm therefore able to mold myself exactly how I want. Yeah? So we're just putting that first, let's say, distinction that can start to mold the way that the self, the individual, views himself and conducts his life. Okay? Now, another point to highlight in the ideas that the Enlightenment period brought is, if we no longer accept the ideas that truth is arrived at by revelation, so in this case neither by God nor by the monarchy, but rather by reason, then why should society be constructed in a top-down approach? Societies, therefore, should be constructed as democracies. Democracies of equality where everybody constructs what is right in a democratic way. We debate, we dialogue, and we decide what is best for us democratically, and then that is how society is formed, which is, of course, responsible for many of the revolutions that we saw in Europe at the time, most famously in France, for example, right? So these are, again, this is all going to make a lot of sense for the Hindu definition of Dharma eventually, okay? So, you still with me? Scientific revolution started to do away with previous structures of knowledge that were, for example, monarchies, the church, etc., religion, as dogmas in general. Reason becomes the champion. However, in this use of reason to know things, to acquire truth, there is another situation that emerges, which is reason to be used in order to discover things which are objectively already there, or is reason to be used to create things that are not yet there? So let me give you an example of this. Let's take human morality, so human behaviors in general. Take any virtue, what we call a virtue. For example, kindness, truthfulness, okay? So we might say those things are objectively good. What does that mean? It means that they're always good, no matter the situation, no matter the circumstances. They are just good, okay? Obviously, a thinking person might take that statement and think, well, there's a lot of problems with that statement. First of all, what is good? Define good. Good in relation to what? Good for what? For example, let's take the statement, truth is always good. I can tell someone the truth. I can imagine scenarios right now in my head where I can tell somebody the truth and it will be bad for our relationship. So, good, we have to come to an agreement of what that actually means, right? So, as a response to the idea that there are objective rights and wrongs, goods and bads, virtues and vices, comes the postmodernist ideology, which is now early 19th century, some say already a little bit later, that essentially says, wait a minute, it's good that we did away with the structures of power and hierarchy that existed with the monarchies and the churches, fine, but to replace it with reason, as if reason can be trusted to find objective truths, is equally dangerous and equally not valid, right? So to say that rationality, reason, can arrive at objective truth claims is problematic, okay? This is a very simplistic presentation of these ideas, but I have to work within the time frame that I have, okay? So the postmodernist idea is therefore aligned to an extent with relativism, which is, let's not make any finite claims, let's not make any objective claims about anything, and instead, let us build a foundation that is predominantly rooted in subjectivity, okay? And subjectivity, therefore, is that it gives power to the individual to interpret as he sees fit. Therefore, there is no universal interpretation, and there is no universal truth that a society can therefore be built upon, right? Now, with that having been said, the question therefore arises, what is truth? Is there even such a thing as truth? Okay, this is the fundamental question. The contrast between inherent Dharma and a subjective relativism, it begs the question, is there such a thing as truth, or is everything just subjective opinions? Okay? And I'm not going to give you an answer, because that's not the point. The whole point is not to be told what is true. The whole point is to figure it out through your own process of realization. Okay? If it even exists, which is again what the question is posing. Now, I can tell you what Guruji says, but that's not me telling you what is true. That's me telling you what another person says. Guruji says that there is such a thing as truth, and it is objective. Okay. Now, part of today, therefore, has to be, how can he make that claim, and how do I struggle to see the same thing that he sees? Why is that? Okay? So we're going to come to that. So here's some thought exercises that are connected to this idea of inherent purpose versus subjective attributed purpose. Are there statements about reality that are objectively true or false? That's the first question. The second question, which is a follow-up of this, is it possible to have objective knowledge of such statements? So remember, by objective, I mean essentially universal. Is it possible for human beings to know some things with certainty? So I had this really cool conversation once with somebody where they wanted to debate me on the existence of God, right? And so I said to them, okay, I've done this 100 times, it never goes well, but let's try to make it go better. Let's do that. And the first thing we can do to make it go better is agree on two things. First of all, the definition of God, because if we're trying to prove different things exist and don't exist, problem. And second, what would be sufficient evidence for the existence of God for you? Because if I have to show you evidence that God is real, then you please tell me what would be enough evidence for you to believe. Because I gave him an example. Imagine you'd step out in your garden and you look into the sky and the clouds have all formed to say, I am God, I am real, believe in me. All the clouds are spelling that out, and then the clouds open up and a voice speaks to you and says your name and says, yes, I'm talking to you, I am God, right? And I said to this person, would that be sufficient evidence that God is real? And they said no. And I said, okay, why not? Because it could be technology, it could be aliens, it could be anything. That doesn't mean that it has to be God. And I said, fair enough, you're right, but then we also can't have a conversation. Because I can't work with that, because if you're going to take anything I present to you and reinterpret it as it could be aliens, there's not a foundation for us to speak on, right? Because I believe in a sufficient degree of evidence. You're saying that there is no such thing as a sufficient degree of evidence because everything can be attributed to anything, right? So this is what I mean when I speak about, is it possible for human beings to know some things with certainty? I may take that incident as certainty of God's existence. Someone will say, could be aliens, therefore certainty is evaporated. Therefore, maybe you have the answer to that question. Okay? Maybe. Are there objective or absolute moral values? This is a semi-important one, and one that often religion clings onto. So religion, which tries to tell you that something is objectively good and bad, right and wrong, very much usually depends on an acceptance in society that there are such a thing as objective moral values. Stealing is bad. Right? We make laws against it. Yeah? Because generally there is an acceptance that it is bad. Unless you're Robin Hood. Then they make movies about you and celebrate you as a hero. You get the point? You get the problem? Right? So stealing is bad. Unless you're stealing from the rich to give to the poor, then it's good. So you see how we quickly make these moral values subjective depending on many other external factors. Is there an inherent and inescapable purpose to life overall? And then the last one, is there an inherent and inescapable purpose to individual life? So the distinction between those two is like this. Life overall, I mean the cosmos, planets, Earth, every living being and every living entity. Are they the result of, let's say, random events, which can be? Or do they hold an inherent purpose, meaning were they designed with a specific purpose in mind? Or, and there can be a second degree of that, which is perhaps the world was designed with a particular purpose, but then human beings in their individual lives were put on this earth with absolute freedom to do with it what they wanted. That is also a possible scenario, right? So I'm asking that as a separate question. So one does not necessitate the other, okay? So we can have been put here with freedom of choice into a designed world, or both could be random, or both can be predetermined. Yeah, we have plenty of options. And these are, as I said, thought exercises. By the end of today, when I present Sanatana Dharma's opinion on all of this, you might have inferred my answer to these questions, but my intention with these questions is actually to let you think for yourself. And what is interesting is that when I think of these questions and I come up with my answers, even today, the irony is that at least in 50% of them, I still contradict what my belief system tells me is true. And this is what, in a sense, shows how conditioned we are one way or another. I'll give you an example. So somebody says here, is it possible for human beings to know something with certainty, right? My intuition immediately tells me, no, it's not possible. Because of the example that I gave earlier, I can put reasonable doubt into anything. I can challenge any statement with an alternative interpretation, right? Then another part of me says, no, but wait a minute, that's not what Sanatana Dharma says, that's not what Guruji says. We can know things with certainty. And I'm like, yeah, it's true. Yeah, okay. I know Guruji is my guru with certainty. Then comes that little mind, really? You never doubt it? You never think anything about that? And then comes my spiritual voice again, says, no, never. And you have to at some point put the filter and say, is this your wishful thinking? Is it what you would like to be true but isn't true? Or is it the fact that I am making this entire inquiry and this entire assessment of whether I can or cannot do something, can human beings know something with certainty or not, from the basis of the human mind, which is my current place of knowing. But what if, instead of knowing from the human mind, I know from the consciousness, which we say is an attribute of the soul, so not from the human mind. So can the soul know something with absolute certainty? Now, my answer to that is yes. And there's a very clear reason as to why. There's a distinction between the human mind's ability to know something and the soul's ability to know something, and why one removes doubt and the other one has doubt present in it, okay? So I'll have to present you that distinction, otherwise we're not going to arrive at our way of solving this entire conundrum between inherent or subjective ideas, okay? But not yet. I have to leave you interested for the remainder of the lecture. Can't give you all the answers now. So we're going to move on. I think this verse is phenomenal. So this is from the Chandogya Upanishad, okay? And this is from the 3rd book, 14th chapter, the 1st verse. It says the following. The first phrase, Sarvam Kalavidam Brahma, you might have heard before. It means all things are Brahman, all things are God. We've used that in Gita classes and in different contexts, but this is the actual verse from which it comes from. So it says, verily all this universe is Brahman, is God. From him do all things originate, into him do they dissolve, and by him are they sustained. On him should one meditate in tranquility. Now verily a person consists of purpose, and as is one's purpose in this world, such one becomes on departing hence. Let one therefore frame for himself a purpose. I'm going to reword those last two sentences, okay? So that it makes it clearer. Now, a person has purpose. People have purpose. And depending on one's purpose in this world, to that you will become when leaving this world. Okay? And then the last sentence is, therefore, a person should frame for himself a purpose. Make yourself a purpose. Have a purpose and therefore pursue it. To that you will become. Now here comes what I think is potentially conflicting statement, but is actually what I believe a nuanced middle ground between the two positions I presented earlier. And that is, a person consists of purpose, therefore you have purpose. That's what the statement is making. You already have purpose, okay? And depending what purpose you have, that outcome you will reach. Now make a purpose for yourself, which suggests that you actually can choose. There's choice. I can make a purpose for myself. So I can design a goal for my life. But that doesn't mean that my life doesn't already have a goal that was designed for me. Because that's the first part. Now, verily, a person consists of purpose. And I'm going to prove that in a separate statement again, that purpose is already attributed to us. Okay? And yet, despite purpose having been attributed to us, we also have the means by which we can create our own, therefore rejecting our inherent purpose. Okay? Now, is there a consequence to that? Hell forever? No. We already know that that doesn't exist. So the consequence of that is exactly what is said here. As per one's purpose in this world, such one becomes on departing. So you choose what you want to do, you choose what you want to pursue, whatever that choice is, that is what you will get. Then comes the famous expression, choose wisely, right? Isn't that the big problem? The ability to choose wisely, because if we all had hindsight, we all would have made many choices differently along our lives, because we don't know one of the most important things that is necessary for making a good choice, and that is the consequence of the choice. If I know where I'm going to go, I'll happily make many choices, right? But the problem is that I don't know where my choice leads me, and therefore I'm betting, I'm guessing to some extent. And so here comes two exciting things. One, adventure, the excitement of the unknown. I could achieve this, I could achieve that, maybe, could be. And then our past experiences, because maybe you've already made many choices throughout your life and many of them didn't go so well. Could be. And so then you look at that and you think, so I have this curiosity which propels me towards choice, towards creativity and imagining futures for myself. And then I have this other force from within that says, what happened the last time you did that? Now, that isn't to try to influence people with fear. That isn't at all the purpose here. It's to show how human experience gradually changes the more we become experienced. So have you ever heard this expression that the recklessness of youth, right? So when you're young, you're more likely to do reckless things than when you're older. Why is that? In theory, of course, there are always exceptions to this rule. Some people become more reckless the older they get. I know some. But the point is that in general, this rule exists. Why? Because the more experienced we become, the more we know how things work. And therefore, we take less risks. Okay? Now, that means we need to talk about human nature. Dharma exists only for humans to understand and therefore comply with or work alongside. And therefore, we need to know what human nature is. Human consciousness manifests in three general forms. The first we call Jnana Shakti, so knowledge. We are conscious beings. We have knowledge. Okay, we have the ability to apprehend the world around us. Right. Second, Icha Shakti, which means feeling. We have the ability to feel. We have will also, which means we have the ability to want something, to desire something, right? And then third, we have Kriya Shakti, which is application. We have the ability to execute. We have the ability to do things. So we're not stationary, inert objects, right? So we have thinking power, knowledge, we have feeling power, we have doing power. Yes? Fair? Human beings have these three faculties, right? For the most part. So human beings therefore have the power to conceptualize by thinking, to conceive of ideas, right? To desire their accomplishment by our will, and to put those ideas into use to achieve concrete outcomes by our application. So we can think, we can desire and we can pursue that desire and make it happen. Yeah? Jnana Shakti, Icha Shakti, Kriya Shakti. I think of an idea, I desire the idea, I produce the outcome of the idea. This is a very fundamental truth, in a sense, about human nature. However, the question arises, do we decide or is it decided for us? What do I mean by decide? The things that we think of, the ideas that we conceptualize and therefore chase into fruition, is it things that we've been told to chase into fruition, things that we've been instructed to think about, or are we able to come up with those ideas by ourselves? And I want you to sit and think for a minute of Guruji. And so if you were about to have a conversation with Guruji, what are you more likely to do? To tell him your plans about what you want to do, what you think is good for you, the ideas that you have conceptualized and conceived in your mind and want to execute, and to request his blessings and help in doing those, okay? Or would you prefer that he instruct you, that he gives you the ideas, that he gives you the instruction, and that you are then only responsible, in a sense, for the execution of those ideas? And I'm not saying that there's a right and wrong. This is something that you have to feel for yourself, to know where you are more or less conditioned. Because life conditions you. You are here sitting in a conditioned way by your past. Okay? And therefore you're going to lean more towards one or the other. Towards independence or dependence. On him or not. Depending also on past experiences. Depending on pride. Depending on humility. Depending on wisdom. So many factors will mold the way you will choose to approach him in general. Now, I will speak for myself. What would I do in such a scenario? Would I go to Guruji and say, Guruji, I feel to do this. I think I want to do this. Can I have your blessing for it? Can I have your help or whatever? Or option B, Guruji, what is it that you think is right for me? Or what is it that is actually right for me in the eyes of God, if such a being exists? And therefore, that is what I would like to do. Right? I would like to do whatever has been attributed to me. And if you think this question is not common, think again. The most common question Guruji has ever gotten in his life is, Guruji, what is my Dharma? Hence the lecture today, what is Dharma? Now, what people mean when they ask him that question is, what am I meant to do with my life? The problem is, that question would suggest that everybody is more on the second one, which is, you tell me what to do. But it's not the case, because Guruji says, first, that's the question he most gets, but second, that's the question that most people dislike him answering. Because he usually tells them what to do, and then they don't like it. It's not what they wanted, which means they already had decided for themselves. They already had conceived of their own plan of what their life is supposed to be. And at the same time, they're asking, can you tell me what my life is supposed to be like, please? Why? Because they recognize in him higher wisdom, or they recognize in him some divinity or whatever it may be. And so there's a part of us that says, sounds like a good idea. Maybe I ask the wise man what my life is supposed to be like. Sure. But you can't do that if it's insincere. Because, and here, how do we measure sincerity? Sincerity is measured on how open you are to actually receive purpose. So attributive purpose, right? Now, I'm really getting to the crux of how this impacts our daily life here. Recap. Society at a large has been debating this topic for centuries. Okay? How do we know things to be true or not? Are we the architects of our own lives, or does life already have inbuilt systems that condition us and therefore we have to work within those systems? Okay? This is a fundamental question. The more time progresses, and I'm sure you can observe this, these things fluctuate from one to the other. It's not a stable line of evolution. It constantly goes from one side to the other, right? Reinterpreting things that before used to be common knowledge. And then once that becomes too interpretive, there's always a big section of society that tries to bring it back to a universal understanding. Right now, the biggest topic is, for example, gender, right? Gender is one of those things where some people will say, no, there is universal, objective facts about gender. Others will say, no, it is an interpretive thing that is subjective to any individual. And then some will push it so far that this opposing movement will again try to push it back in this direction, and you have this constant conflict, right? Between whether something is already decided for us and you have to work with that, or you can redecide for yourself. Yes? And you can observe this on many different levels of society every single day. For example, the roles of males and females. I'm taking one step back from gender, because gender wouldn't even allow me to ask that question. So let's assume that there is the binary. Let's work within the binary of male and female, just for the sake of the thought exercise, okay? So within the thought exercise of the binary of male and female, it has been a long-standing debate of, are there inherent differences, not just biological, but psychological, for example, sociological, to men and women? So the idea of the tabula rasa would say, no, there is no difference. The idea of John Locke, for example, as I said, during the Enlightenment period, would say, no, not really, because if the mind is a blank slate that is simply socially constructed as you grow up, then it is the society within which you grow that forms your idea of man or woman. So what is a man? What is a woman? What is a man's role? What is a woman's role? What is a man's character? What is a woman's character? It's social constructs depending on where you grow up. That's one argument. It's not Guruji's argument. So Guruji will say it's not 100% predetermined, but there are natural tendencies inbuilt into a man and natural tendencies inbuilt into a woman. Now, that is nowadays especially a controversial opinion. Okay? But that is Guruji's stance. And he says, why is that stance that way? Again, working with the assumption of the binary, I'll make a claim. Women's bodies have one characteristic that male bodies do not, right? I think it's pretty obvious what that main characteristic is. Women can give birth, right? So therefore there is inbuilt sustenance into the woman's body. True? The woman's body is capable of sustaining a living organism within it. It has the mechanisms to do that, right? And so therefore, Guruji is saying that psychologically, this is also an inbuilt programming, that women have a psychological tendency towards sustenance, towards caring, right? Which men have in a lesser extent. And this is a direct correlation between physiology and psychology, which is what his claim is, okay? Can you see why such a statement is controversial depending on the ideology that you subscribe to or not? Yes? This is why I'm presenting a wider scope, and this is why this is called advanced Dharma, because I'm not just telling you, this is what Dharma is, follow it, thanks. Right? I'm trying to show to you how different ideas have been constructed over time in such a way that it would present why some of Guruji's ideas or Sanatana Dharma's ideas or the Bhagavad Gita's ideas would not necessarily be socially acceptable in different environments. Okay? And the root of where that social unacceptability or that ideological conflict stems from. Yeah, what is the root question? Is there objective truth or not? Right? And that's one of the funny things, because for a long time in my life, I held the belief that we are nothing but social constructs as human beings. I am as my environment made me. Yeah? If I was born in a different culture, in a different country, I'd be completely different. And the answer to that I have now is I would be partially different. So I would be a little different, but not completely different. Because some parts of me are socially constructed, some parts of me are inherently programmed. You understand the difference? between the two claims, right? That I am completely a blank slate that is constructed by my social environment versus I am completely programmed to be a specific way versus the more nuanced middle ground, which is what I tried to say here, for example, a nuanced middle ground, which is that there are parts of me that are inherently programmed and therefore inbuilt into who I am in this particular life, and there are parts of me that I can still mold by my choices and my social environment, which is the stance that I take today, right? That there is a middle ground between these two stances. Yeah? Some subjectivity exists, but there are some objective facts that are also not subject to denial. This is my stance now, based again on the teachings of Guruji. So the question therefore arises, how do we know our Dharma? The question that everybody asks Guruji, assuming that Dharma does indeed exist objectively, meaning we all have an inherent purpose. So spoiler alert, the purpose of creation is to provide a platform. That's it. A platform for what? For souls to act out their relationship with God. In various different life forms, in various different places, in various different ways. Okay? That is our belief. Okay? Therefore, what is the inherent dharma of the individual souls? To act out their relationship with God. Is it a relationship of equals? No. Why? Krishna says so, chapter 15, verse 7, Bhagavad Gita. We are an amsha of Him. We are a part of Him. So therefore, if it's not a relationship of equals, but rather of part, the analogy is, look at the body. Why do we look at the body? Because the verse that I read to you earlier from the Chandogya Upanishad said, Sarva Kalavidam Brahmam. All things are God. So if all of this is the cosmic body of God, and we are amshas of God, then it stands to reason that we are parts of the body of God. Okay? Let's put it like that. It works really well as an analogy. So I'm a finger of God. Bhaktidas is the ear of God. Why not? So we're different parts, but we're both in God's body. So in one way we're equal, in another way we're different. We each have unique dharmas. The ear's purpose is to hear. It's not to point. So if I want to point at Santoshi back there, I'm not going to go like this with my ear. Look, my ear's pointing at her. Makes no sense, right? My finger has several purposes, one of which is to point, right? So two parts of the same organism, essentially the same, functionally different. What is different? The Dharma, okay? The purpose is different. So let us assume this to be true. So assuming that Dharma does indeed exist objectively, how does one acquire knowledge of it? So we come to Bhakti Marga, we've been told we're here to have a relationship with God. Okay, that's the overall Dharma. Every soul has to have a relationship with God. Okay, cool. But my soul has gone on a different journey than your soul. We've all gone on different journeys, and we're here with a very unique situation. So what is my unique Dharma? Because my unique situation demands a unique set of behaviors and activities and whatever else. So we each do have a unique Dharma. And so that concept is what we call Vishwa Dharma, universal Dharma, and Swadharma, meaning personal Dharma. So the Vishwa Dharma is to be in a loving relationship with God. Everybody has that same Dharma, whether they know it, accept it, or not. The Swadharma is my specific way of acting out my relationship with God, which will not be the same as someone else's. So that's the one we really want to know. Guruji, what's my Swadharma? How do I act out my individual relationship with God? How do we get knowledge of it? So the Manusmriti, this is very unromantic, by the way. Most people would love a romantic answer to this question, which is, how do I know my unique relationship with God? It will be revealed in the depths of my heart. It might be, but it might also not. And in the meanwhile, you tend to have to find another place to get that answer. And that is why it is the most common question made to Guruji, because they did not find the answer in the depths of their heart waiting for them. Or B, they don't even know where their heart is, and therefore they don't know where to look for the answer in the depths of that supposed heart. Therefore, wise man, Guruji, you tell me, what is my purpose, please? And this is not unique to Guruji, nor is it unique to Hinduism. It's in every religious spiritual framework. It's what every priest gets asked. It's what every reverend gets asked. It's what everybody in any position of deemed authority gets asked. What is my life meant to be? What's my purpose? Right? So the Manusmriti says, the Veda, Shastra, scripture, tradition, the conduct of virtuous people and one's own conscience. This is declared to be the fourfold source of Dharma right before one's eyes. So what does that mean? It means I'm sitting here on the 30th of, what month are we in? March, thank you. And I'm trying to figure out what to do with my life. And Guruji's not here. Problem. Guruji is in Mauritius, enjoying his life, helping other people that are not called me. So I want to know my Dharma. I think, okay, I call Guruji. He has a phone, great. Poor souls who lived 100 years ago, they couldn't have that 200 years ago, 500 years ago. They were sending pigeons to Mauritius. Maybe not. So then here I am and I call him, he doesn't pick up the phone. I message him, doesn't read my message. Terrible. So now I have to figure this out for myself. Or accept being lost, which I don't accept. So I'm going to figure this out for myself. Hence such an instruction exists. So where am I going to look for my purpose? What am I supposed to be doing in my life? Okay, Vedas, Shastra, Bhagavad Gita. Okay, pretty helpful. Not so specific, but generally quite helpful. Tradition, what is it meant by tradition? Tradition is meant by the path or those who have followed the same path that you are on before you, right? So if you come in, for example, if you're a Catholic, so what have other Catholics done with their life? Yeah, that might be a way of knowing what a Catholic is meant to do with their lives. I'm a Vaishnava. What do other Vaishnavas do with their life? Okay, now I know what I'm generally supposed to do with my life. I'm in Bhakti Marga. What do other Bhakti Marga people do with their lives? Okay, so I kind of have an idea of what I'm supposed to do with my life. That's the idea. But there's another degree of filter, which is the conduct of virtuous people, which is, okay, let me take the best examples, not the worst. So what are the virtuous people doing with their lives? But the question is, of course, who decides who is virtuous? Back to the subjectivity nightmare. But again, let's suppose that these virtuous people are obvious, like as in the system is designed to show them off to you so that they're clear and easy to find. For example, by their bright orange clothes, right? Which is what the system is supposed to do. Yeah? Do I think it does it? No. That's my honest opinion. I don't. But the system is supposed to be that way. Here, we'll show you who the virtuous people are so that you can copy them, so that you don't copy the others. In practice, it doesn't work that way. Never has, and it shouldn't. Okay? Why do I say that with confidence? Because I wear orange. Therefore, I can stand here and say, knowing myself, I kindly request you to think twice before copying me. Right? And lastly, and most popular of all, one's own conscience. Now, most people put that in first place. What I think is what I'm going to do. Now, why is it that it is last place in this particular hierarchy? It's very simple, because the entire system of Sanatana Dharma is predicated on the idea that we are conditioned souls governed by ego. And therefore, we are not trustworthy. We are not reliable analysts of reality. We see everything through the lens of our own bias. We see everything through the lens of our own desires and justifications. And therefore, it is very rare that our own mind gives us the best solution or the best and most accurate assessment of ourselves. You can see this in yourself. I see it in myself. I am much better at analyzing someone else neutrally than I am at analyzing myself neutrally. I can look at someone, speak to them for 5 minutes, and come up with a whole pros and cons sheet for them, saying, look, I think you really need to do this and that, and clearly you have a problem here and a problem there, da, 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 da. Now, you asked me to do this about myself. We did a funny thing. I was in a job interview once. Not for me. I was hearing the interviewer, right? And we asked a question to the person who was applying. We said, so do you have any weaknesses? And the person said, none that I can think of. And I think it was for that reason that the person didn't get hired. Because they said, I don't believe that. I just don't believe that. That's too delusional, in my opinion. Because I don't believe that a single person has no weaknesses, right? But your inability to see it is problematic to me. Because your inability to see it and accept it and speak it out loud, for me, points at, to an extent, arrogance, to another extent, delusion, right? So a misapprehension of things. You see one thing as something else, for example, right? You can accuse me of many things in my life, also arrogance, no problem. But one of the things that I think I genuinely and consciously try to cultivate is an incredible degree of transparency and honesty when I sit up here and talk. Doesn't matter what topic it is, or satsang, or course, or whatever, I will admit every single nonsense that goes on in my head and in my life and mistakes that I have made because of one very specific thing that I genuinely believe. And that is that the more you cultivate that with yourself, transparency, the more likely you are to arrive at the truth about yourself. The more you cultivate hiding parts of yourself and presenting masks to people, oh, I am more spiritual than I really am, I want you to believe that, for example, the more likely I'm going to start believing my own lie. And I'm going to forget the truth because I'll hide it so deep under the carpet that I'll start to construct an entire different version of myself. And you often need very dramatic situations to rip the carpet back open, and then all this stuff comes out again, and you're like, oh yeah, I have plenty to work on still, right? And so I almost feel like part of my daily sadhana is to just lift the carpet and go like this, and it's like, let's make sure there's nothing hiding under there, right? But it's tough. It can open you up to a lot of things, and it's not the easiest thing in the world to do. But the reason I'm speaking about that now is because we have to recognize that tendency that as human beings we have, and therefore we start to understand why the hierarchy is made in this order, because it's like, yeah, we are not so trustworthy when it comes to ourselves, positive or negative. So I gave you the example of somebody who overestimates themselves, right? Some narcissism to some degree. But there's also the opposite, people who really have self-esteem issues, who think of themselves in a very low way, right? Like, I'm not good enough, I'm not this, I'm not that. Often completely wrong also. That the person is actually much better than they think they are, right? And so this is generally not a human strength, yeah? Self-assessment, self-awareness, which is why it's one of the key spiritual pursuits. We do Atma Kriya to become more aware of ourselves, more aware of who we actually are, for example. One of the reasons of Atma Kriya, not only, right? So therefore the hierarchy is as it is. Our own ideas, the conducts of virtuous people, the conducts of our tradition, and the instructions of scripture. The Bhagavad Gita is incredibly good at this, at regulating our minds in a good way, in a healthy way, in a non-dogmatic way. There's a reason why Guruji says that we should read it every day, right? Chapter 16, Krishna says, do not allow your own desires to be that which dictates what you should and should not do. It's not trustworthy. And either we believe or we don't believe. And belief should come from experience, not blindness. That's dogmatic, right? So belief should come from your own lived experience. If you live and you see that that is true, that your desires often cloud your judgment, then you start to believe in those statements more and more because they mirror the observable reality that you have, right? Now, the cool thing about this is that it's a muscle. Your conscience is a muscle that you can train. So the more you practice what is, for example, instructed by scripture or by Guruji, right? So imagine I have 10 scenarios, and 10 times I ask Guruji, what should I do? And he says, left, right, left, left, right, left, right, right, right. Yeah? I start to train the muscle of my conscience to understand his filter, his way of seeing things. So on the 11th incident, if I don't have Guruji and I cannot ask him, the likelihood that I will do as he would have instructed me is much higher than if I hadn't asked him these other 10 times. You understand? Because I've trained my conscience to align with his way of seeing things, his filter. Now, I would only wish to do that if I believed that his filter was in any way superior than my own. If I don't believe that, then don't do it. Simple. Super simple. And the same applies to any book, any person, any god, any guru, anything. If you believe that they have a superior understanding of reality, a superior vision, then, of course, you can choose to align your vision to theirs. If you don't, then don't. No? Super simple. So, in the pursuit of objective Dharma, meaning what should and should not be done, the Padma Purana, we've spoken about this before, but I want to speak about it in a different way today than I have before. The Padma Purana speaks of 12 components, 12 objective values, 12 things which the Shastra says are objectively good for your spiritual purpose, which is inherent to you. Okay? Now, 6 of them are self-related, 6 are interpersonal. So it's how I relate to others. Okay? And yeah, truth is one of them. And I just said earlier that truth can be a problem, for example. Truth can make things worse. But here's where we need to start having more and more nuanced conversations. Religion, philosophy, psychology are not kindergarten subjects for a reason, because you cannot speak of them in black and white simplistic terms, because you always lose something in doing that. You have to speak with nuance and depth. So when we say, oh, truth is one of the pillars of Dharma, yeah, let's have a dialogue about truth first. Let's understand in what way is truth a pillar of Dharma? Because there are actually rules that regulate how you should engage with the principle of Satyam. It's not just tell the truth all the time unconditionally. That's not how it works. It's absolutely not how it works. Okay? So, self-related, objective principles. I want to ask you a quick question. For those of you who were here at the beginning of the lecture, I said that Dharma has its root in the Sanskrit word dharana, and dharana means, anybody remembers? To support. Thank you. So that which supports, right? So I've said that the purpose of the individual soul is to act out their loving relationship with God, right? So these are 12 components which support acting out that relationship with God. Now you may say, yeah, but Swami Revati, we have many other things that we do in this planet too. We don't just act out our relationship with God. Yeah? I have to go to work. And in the work environment, some of these principles are not helpful at all. Like if I act these out, I'm never going to get my promotion. I don't get my salary increase. And I've had those real life conversations with people. They're like, you know what? I have a real conflict, Swami, because I try to follow our teachings and I just get overlooked every time because I'm humble, I'm self-restrained, I don't, act in an immoral way because I could step on other people to get to a higher position. It would be very beneficial for my family. I'd get a higher salary. I'd be able to look after them in a better way. I'd be able to contribute to the temples and the ashrams that we want to build. And I'm like, yeah, well, depends what you put on top of your hierarchy. What is your dharma? What is your purpose? Is your purpose ultimately to cultivate a relationship with God or not? And if it is, then you should put on top of your priority the cultivation of a conduct and a behavior that is conducive to a loving relationship with God above any other purpose. And if you have to pay the price of that choice elsewhere, then so be it. That is why we have a dharma, a purpose that drives our decision-making process. Remember, at the very beginning of this lecture, I said that dharma, or purpose, has severe consequence to the way we construct societies and individual lives. Our choices are predicated by our internal hierarchies of values, what we think is more important than something else. Every time you go left on a road, you are choosing left, but you are going further away from right. Every time you make that turn, right? When you go north, you're moving further away from south. There is consequence to choosing something. So, self-related principles of Dharma, purity, socham. So purity, it can mean cleanliness on a physical level, but generally it means cleanliness of mind, of clarity of mind. Austerity, so tapasya. Study, swadhyaya, so the pursuit of knowledge. Contentment, or peacefulness, they are synonymous in this case. The idea of contentment is essentially to not seek more than that which satisfies your needs. Yeah, and we're going to come to that as the final slide for today, which is the biggest human struggle, needs versus wants, but we'll come to that. Self-restraint, don't take more than necessary. Worship, so the worship of the Lord in this case, since that is the inherent dharma of our being. Forgiveness is interpersonal now. Now we go into the interpersonal section. For us to be able to cultivate our relationship with God, why is forgiveness important? You know, Brij Kishore annoyed me the other day. I annoyed him. We had a big fight. And then here we are. But we're just cultivating our own individual relationships with God. So who cares, right? Who cares that we had a fight? Who cares that we're not getting along? That's not my dharma. My dharma is not to get along with Brij Kishore. My dharma is to get along with Krishna, for example. Well, here's the problem. Krishna cares that I don't get along with Brij Kishore. Why? Because Krishna also loves Brij Kishore. Very simple psychology. Ask any parent. Does the parent not care that their sons don't like each other? Of course he cares. Yeah, so it's like a parent has son 1, son 2. Son 1 and son 2 hate each other. The parent goes, I don't care. I have an individual relationship with either one of them. They can hate each other, no problem. That's not the parents I've met, right? And so God has a very similar psychology. Because, again, this is about attractiveness. God is attractive to us. We are attractive to Him. People who cultivate conflict are not very attractive people. People who hold grudges, it's not a very attractive qualities. And, I mean, if you think differently, then no problem. But I speak from, at least, I would say, the majority of opinions that I've gathered. And I can ask the room here, if you agree with me, that conflict and lack of forgiveness and grudges and all of these things tend not to be attractive qualities. Am I right? Yeah? Okay. So we see that often the interpersonal relationship that we have with God is very similar to the interpersonal relationships that we have with human beings. They're almost mirrors. The psychology of one often works in the other. So another one, generosity, dhanam. So generosity means if I have more than I need, then I give it to others. Right? So, again, why would this be something that matters to God? Who cares if I'm giving something to someone else or not? For the same reason. Again, use parent psychology. One of your children only has one pair of shoes that he has to wear every day. The other child has 5. And they have the same shoe size. Right? Wouldn't it be a nice gesture for the one who has 5 to give a couple or give one to the one who only has 1? Then everybody has what they need. No? Simple. So it's these kind of basic, non-complicated psychologies, right, that we have to apply to some degree. And we don't need to make it more complex than this. Non-violence. I don't need to explain that, surely. Right? Which parent loves to walk into their house and sees the 2 sons punching each other in the face? Right? These are simple things. When you apply human norms to this, then you understand the relationship with God in a really simple way. Okay? Now again, remembering that there are 3 agents. Yeah? There's the agent of thought, agent of speech, agent of action, the body. So thought, speech, body. Yeah? Violence can be happening on any of these 3 levels. You can have violent thoughts, you can have violent verbal action, and violent physical action. Right? All of these are to be avoided. However, someone might say, okay, but I'm in the North Pole. There are only fish here. I can't grow carrots, and I can't live on prana. Not yet. Therefore, I have to kill these fish to live. But then I'm going to be breaking my principles of Dharma, and God will not love me anymore. Right? No. That's why I said there has to be nuance. Ahimsa is not a prohibition of violence. Ahimsa is that violence should always be executed to a minimum necessary amount for the preservation of that which is of greater importance. It's a complex definition. It is the minimum use of violence for the preservation of that which is of greater importance than that to which the violence is being executed towards. So then you'll say, how dare you suggest that a human life is more important than a fish life? right? Because I'm saying that is the logic. You can act out violence towards a fish if something more important will be lost if that violence is not happening. So for example, if I don't eat this fish, I'm going to die, right? Well, within the framework of Sanatana Dharma, a human life is the pinnacle of the soul's journey until it reaches God realization. You have worked through lifetimes to earn a human birth, right? And so the preservation of that human birth is more important. Then comes the Gita's knowledge, chapter 2. Who is killing and who is being killed? Nobody, right? Why? Because we are souls. But you see, either one of these principles without the other has problems. Because if you talk about, oh, I can kill the fish because I'm more important than the fish, by that logic, we can start justifying a lot of killing, okay? On the flip side, if we say only, well, we are souls, nobody's killed, nobody is killing, then again, I can justify a lot of killing because don't worry, I'm not killing anyone. Pew, 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 pew. I start killing everybody and say, chapter 2 of the Gita, nobody's being killed, nobody's killing. Pew, 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 pew. Right? So we do need some groundedness to these principles, and the interconnectivity of them is usually what grounds them. When you take any one of these principles of Dharma in an isolated example, you can quickly manipulate it to be something twisted. If you take it within the system of 12, it is virtually impossible to corrupt. Because there will always be self-regulatory principles of truth, a self-regulatory principle of self-restraint, right? So therefore, how can violence become unhinged or unjustifiable if truth is also being kept, if self-restraint is also being kept, right? So none of these pillars can go out of control if the system is being followed. You get my point? If you take one out of the system, then it can be abused and manipulated in any way, because there are not other regulating principles onto it. Then we can talk about truth. I said truth was nuanced. Yes, because truth can be used to cause harm, and then it breaks the principle of ahimsa. You can use the truth to offend someone with no constructive purpose whatsoever. Or you can use constructive feedback, which might be hurtful, but is with the intent of improving, which is different, right? That's very different. So when you're learning something, learning to play, when I was younger, I started to learn to play violin. I never succeeded, so nobody expect me to play violin, please. But I did start to learn, right? And I wasn't very good. And my teacher constructively told me so. She was a Russian teacher, and she was very demanding, I have to say. It made me scared of Russians for a while. And she came to me, and she was just saying, like, she was very cold, and she would just say, this is wrong. And I'm like, yeah, okay. I'm trying to get it right. Try harder. She was telling me the truth. I needed to try harder, and it was wrong. Yeah? She was helping me, though. She was trying to help me. She wasn't just trying to make me feel terrible. Did it make me feel terrible? Maybe, but it wasn't the intent. Intent matters tremendously here. Can you think of scenarios where the truth will be used with the intent of hurting someone? Yeah. I can think of tons. I can think of tons of scenarios where you may use the truth with the intent of hurting someone. Right? And so that is one of the embedded principles of Satyam. Satyam coherent with ahimsa. Not Satyam independent of ahimsa. That doesn't work. Yeah? So that's why when we speak about Dharma, you cannot speak in random terms. Oh, Dharma is to tell the truth. No, it isn't. Dharma is to tell the truth within a wider context of behavior and conduct and filters. It's not so simple. I'll give you an example that I actually committed once, this fault. It's a nuanced one, but one that I really learned from. I was once with Guruji in his home, and he told me something about a fellow God brother, an opinion that he had about their behavior, right? So he said, oh, I think, I didn't like what they did yesterday when they did this, that, and the other. And what did I do? I went and told that person. I said, oh, by the way, I was with Guruji, and he told me that he didn't like what you did in this moment or whatever. Now, my intent is cloudy. I don't know. I didn't feel in that moment that I was saying it to hurt the person, especially because the person's my friend, right? But I cannot also tell you cleanly that it was just a pure sharing. Maybe there was something there of insecurity and jealousy, and let me tell him, and then maybe I feel a bit better about myself. And I can't tell you for sure. It was quite some years ago. But this person became very sad. Oh, Guruji thinks that about me, and was so sad. And his relationship with Guruji was harmed because of this statement that I made, right? And he was so hurt that then he wrote to Guruji and said, Guruji, I heard you said this about me, and I'm so sorry, and it makes me really sad, and da-da-da-da-da. And Guruji only writes back to this person, who told you? So I already knew I had made a mistake. So then he says, oh, Swami Revatikaanta told me. Next thing I know, I'm getting a phone call from Guruji. And Guruji says, you come to my place. I need to talk to you. So I go, and he says, who gave you permission to say that? Who said that you could tell him? And I said, well, it was about him, and I just thought, it's nothing bad. It wasn't with bad intent. And he says, if I wanted him to know, do you think I could not have told him myself? I told you. I didn't tell him. I said, yes, you're right. So it's not a problem, but then there's always consequence to these things, which is, if you can't keep these things to yourself, then I can't tell you things. Simple. No problem. I accept that it was my fault for telling you. Now, of course, this makes me feel rubbish. Guruji doesn't trust me. He will no longer tell me things. Right? And as I was leaving, he says to me, it's not nice what you did. Because you are saying something he wasn't ready to hear, and it hurt him. It hurt him. And I said, okay, I'm sorry. I apologize. And I understood that even though it was true, everything I said was true, I made up nothing, I exaggerated nothing, it wasn't even some, Guruji didn't tell me, hey, by the way, this is a secret, don't tell anyone, right? But by virtue of my own lack of due diligence, which means my filter of checking, why am I saying this? What's my intent? What am I actually hoping to achieve by this? I didn't do that. If I had done that and my answer came out 100% clean, which is, I just want to help this person improve their relationship with Guruji, it may have still been wrong, but I would have been able to stand in front of Guruji much cleaner, heart open, and say, Guruji, I promise I was just trying to help. And then he can still correct me if he wants me to have a different conduct, no problem. But I wouldn't feel guilty. You understand? But I felt guilty. Why? Because I hadn't even checked. I'm not saying for certain it was done with malicious intent, but I didn't check my intent. You understand? So I didn't really follow a principle of true Dharma, which is, I'm going to speak the truth, but with what intent? For what purpose? Yeah? That's why I tell you, something like truth is very nuanced. It's not black and white, and it belongs in a wider system of non-violence. I hurt that person. I knew it would hurt that person when I said it. And I didn't make sure that I was hurting them only to improve their situation. So my intent was not clear, therefore it was just an act of violence. Understand? And that is where the problem starts. Yeah? Intent. If intent is not clarified, then everything follows from that into a negative direction. Okay, so those are 12 pillars, veneration for the Guru being the last one. And I wanted to end with this principle today. Shreyas versus Preyas. Okay, two Sanskrit terms. We'll find them in this verse of the Katha Upanishad. So today you'll have noticed I introduced a couple of verses from the Upanishads because I want to really get, in a sense, to the root of Sanatana Dharma, not forgetting that we always talk about Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, etc. But Hinduism is essentially rooted in the Vedic literature, in the Vedas themselves, and the Upanishads are obviously a part of that. And the Upanishads are full of wisdom that are often ignored because the Bhagavad Gita is just more accessible, right? So in this verse we see, for example, there are two paths. These words are spoken by Yamraj. There are two paths, the good and the pleasant. Different indeed are their purposes, but both of them bind one. Of these two, it is well for one who takes hold of the good, but one who chooses the pleasant loses the very object of human life. I want you now to combine this with the verse from the Chandogya Upanishad which I read. The verse from the Chandogya Upanishad says that human beings have a purpose. And according to the purpose that we take on in life, that is what we will achieve. Krishna confirms this in chapter 8 of the Bhagavad Gita. He says that whatever it is that you are thinking at the time of your death, to that you will attain. And he says that what you think of at the time of your death is the natural consequence of whatever you did throughout your life. Yeah, these are Krishna's words beginning of chapter 8. That point is mirrored in the Chandogya Upanishad verse that I read earlier. I'm going to come back to it just so that you can have another look at it. Okay? So, Chandogya Upanishad, as is one's purpose in this world, such one becomes on departing hence. Yeah? So, the same principle that Krishna teaches in the beginning of chapter 8. Yeah? You choose your purpose, to that you will attain. So we think we have choice, right? Subjectivity, relativism, postmodernism. We choose what our life's about. But here Yamraj says, yes, you do have that choice, but please understand that those choices have consequences. If you choose what's good for you, good. If you choose what's pleasant for you, you lose the very object of human life, the actual inherent purpose of human life. Remember I said to you earlier that I would again prove to you that life does have an inherent purpose? It's not just attributive, it's not just pure choice. It is this nuanced combination. You have a programmed purpose of life, and yet you can choose to live your life as you want. That is the reality. You can make of your life whatever you want, and it will have the consequences that are correspondent to that choice. No problem. It's not all predetermined. There is the element of choice. Aspects of your life are predetermined. So people misunderstand this about karma. They think karma means that every part of your life is predetermined, right? It's going to happen exactly as your karma mandates. It's not true. Karma makes sure that certain things will happen in your life. But you have choice in how you respond to those things. And those choices create new paths, new branching paths from those karmic consequences. Now, you may argue that the choices you're going to make are heavily conditioned by the choices you've made before. And that is true, undoubtedly. But can that conditioning be changed? Yes, absolutely it can. If it could not, there would be no value in sadhana. If your conditioning could not be changed, sadhana would be of no use. Yeah. So all of this can be changed. It doesn't mean that there is not already an inherent thing to be changed. So here Yamraj is saying that there is the good and the pleasant, the shreyas and the preyas. This is the daily struggle that we all have with Dharma. If I ask you the question, how many of you live by these 12 principles 100% of the time? I doubt I'm going to get a single hand go up, including my own, right? Now, if I were to ask you, why not? You may answer ignorance, because I didn't know about them or I don't think of them, fine. But those of you who don't have that privilege of saying ignorance will say what? Disagreement? Rarely. Rarely there is disagreement. I have yet to find one initiated devotee of Guruji that subscribes to Guruji's worldview that looks at this and says, no, one of these is rubbish. I don't agree with one of these. We all agree. So then why is it that we don't live by them? And this is the answer. It's shreyas versus preyas. It's the difficulty in choosing what is right over what is pleasant. Right? Because sometimes living by these principles doesn't feel good. Self-restraint rarely feels good. I can tell you that from personal experience. Right? If you offer me 10 slices of pizza, do I need all 10? I think we all know the answer. No, I don't. Would it be pleasant to eat all 10? Yes. Is there serious consequence to eating all 10 slices of pizza? No. There's some consequence. But unfortunately, life is not only serving us slices of pizza. There are other things that come to us in life. And it is in those more serious moments, in those more serious questions, that I then raise the question, do we choose the shreyas or the preyas, meaning that which is good for us and right, or that which is pleasant for us? And this, more than anything else, is what steers us a little off the road that we know we're supposed to be on. There's something very interesting about spiritual communities and spiritual life in general, and that is that we all actually know what to do, and yet we don't act like it, and often we speak as if we require guidance and instruction. But we all have the inner compass, and we all have sufficient knowledge already that we know what's right and wrong. We know what's good and bad for our path. I don't need to sit here and sell anyone the virtues of doing japa, or doing kriya, or doing puja, or coming to prayers, or any of these things. I don't think I have to, at least, right? I'm pretty sure everyone goes, well, I definitely know that those things are good for me. Yeah, I know the value that they have. And yet, every one of us will still be able to hold our hands up and say, and yet I don't do them all the time. And I'm telling you, why? Because other things give more immediate pleasure. And so there is one universal truth, and I say that carefully, that has been observed across cultures, across history, across religions. And that is that the greatest measure of human wisdom is the ability to defer pleasure. And what I mean by that is to sacrifice in the present for a greater outcome in the future. It's the biggest marker of human wisdom. When you're able to resist the immediate self-gratification for the long-term benefit of anything. Relationships, friendships, work, society, on every level this same principle applies. If you're able to resist short-term goals for greater long-term ones, you will experience far greater degrees of success and satisfaction than the one who does not restrict themselves in that manner. If you don't believe me, then I would invite you to re-look at history and re-look at some of the spiritual giants of your own tradition or others, if need be. Take Guruji's example. And he has given this example. He says, you think I came to Germany because I get immediate gratification from it? You think I built Bhakti Marga the way I did because I get immediate results? I can tell you stories where it took years and years to build SPN as it is now. It could have been done in less than a year. Easy. If you just put the money in it, you pay the people, they come and build it, finished. Much faster. But he consciously refused this and says, no, because like this, you get the result quicker, but you don't get long-term benefit that you would if you do it the slower, harder way. By learning, by building yourselves, by growing, you will get much better benefit than doing it all like this. It was his conscious decision for us. We didn't choose that, I promise you. If you had asked the construction team at the time which option they wanted, they would have told you, pay up the cash, Guruji. Let's get the professionals here and get a nice functioning ashram with hot water and everything from day one, right? Who wanted to sit here in the cold with not, no heating or whatever? Nobody. But it teaches you something. And that growth is worth far more than the instant gratification. So, back to the topic of Shreyas and Preyas. Shreyas and Preyas are key principles to properly understanding how to implement Dharma in our day-to-day life. If you want to follow these 12 principles of Dharma, if you want to follow Dharma in general, to summarize today's lecture, there are, I would say, 3 to 4 things that I think you have to take away. First, as per Paramahamsa Vishwananda, the Vedic literature, including the Bhagavad Gita, life has inherent meaning. Everything has inherent meaning. You are not the creator. You are not neither Brahma nor Narayana. Therefore, you do not decide what life is for. You participate in life. You don't create life. So by participation, we are afforded certain freedoms, certain choices within the framework of the intended platform, okay, the intended life. So that is what we call a conditioned will. You don't have free will to do whatever you want, neither do you have no will. You have a conditioned will, which means you have some degree of choice in certain circumstances with certain options. Okay? So accepting that reality, accepting that game, we therefore have to then know, what is my role within this? And there are 2 degrees of knowing that. There is the overall Vishwa Dharma, which is that actually my role is to serve and love and commune with God. And then there is my specific individual role in this Leela, which is unique to me and no one else, right? The best way to know this is to ask the one who can see this. I didn't answer this question throughout today's lecture. I'll do it now. Why can I not see it and Guruji can? Why can he see what my Dharma is and I can't? It's simple. Because I have a, not a conditioned, I have a suppressed consciousness, suppressed into this physical body, which means that I only see what my material senses allow me to see. And unfortunately, karma is not a material object. So I can't see it. I wish I could. I've said this before in plenty of satsangs. Wouldn't it be nice if I could just like put on my glasses and I could look at myself or in the mirror and then suddenly you see your entire karma and then you go like, oh, that's why that happens all the time. No problem. Oh, look at all my samskaras. Okay, cool. Now I arrange it like this. Would be wonderful. But we can't see it. Why can Guruji see it? Because his consciousness is not suppressed into his body. He has an unrestricted consciousness. How do I know this? I can only give you evidences. And how do I know you will accept those evidences? I don't. That's what I said earlier about the guy with the aliens in the sky. What evidences can I give of unsuppressed consciousness? The fact that Guruji is capable of knowing things that I am thinking internally, not expressing externally. So his consciousness is not suppressed to what he can see, because he cannot see my internal thoughts. I cannot see your internal thoughts, right? Because physical eyes don't permit that. So therefore his consciousness, his field of awareness is not restricted to material senses. He knows what's happening whilst sitting, having dinner in Germany, in Kenya. Why? Because I've had these things happen in front of me, right? He'll call someone in Kenya and say, oh, don't do what you're about to do. Puts the phone down, right? And then that person calls and says, oh my God, I was about to do this and that. And then Guruji told me not to. Amazing, right? And you're like, well, yeah, because his consciousness is not restricted to what his physical senses allow him to see. His eyes cannot see into Kenya while sitting in a dinner table in Germany. Nobody's eyes are that good, right? So again, these are the evidences I provide for an unrestricted consciousness. If we take this rationally, therefore, his unrestricted field of consciousness allows him to see beyond his physical senses. Therefore, when he says to me, your karma is as such and your dharma is as such, am I going to deny this on the basis of what? Other than shreyas and prayas. The tendency I'll have to not accept his statement will be because I don't like his statement. His statement might not be pleasant. When I was 21 years old, I said to Guruji, what was I born to do? To have a family or to be a monk? And he said, you want to know the answer? I said, no. Because I can already tell what the answer is going to be, and it's not the answer I want to hear. That's the whole point I'm trying to bring across. I already had inherent dharma. I wanted to choose a different dharma, and I could have. But I then have to take responsibility for the consequences of that choice. Did I want the consequences of that choice? No. I wanted my cake and to eat it too, right? So he says, no, you were born to be a monk. And I said, cool. Can I delay it? Like, can I just do some other stuff first and then I'll come and be a monk later? He said, you can try. But I don't promise you that that attempt will not bring some not so nice consequences, because when you go against your nature, it's not always fun. And I said, okay, sounds a bit threatening. And he says, sounds like truth. If you find it threatening, it's because you don't like it. Understand the difference? I say to me, oh, you're threatening me with consequences. And he's saying, no, I'm simply presenting you with the truth. If you find the truth threatening, it's because you don't like it. And that I can't help. Whether you like the truth or not is your business. But I'm telling you what the truth is. And it's your choice, therefore, what you do with that truth. No? And then, okay, I made my choice. Not the easiest choice in the world, but Haribol. We still go. More than a decade later, right? So this is, I think, all that we can do. We're already over time today for this Dharma lecture. I wanted to basically show how sometimes we have to be a bit more thoughtful when we speak about many of our stances as if they're just common knowledge. Yeah, when we say, look, your life has purpose, you're supposed to, love God and whatever, it's like, well, there's a lot of people that think differently, not just for atheistic reasons or for religious reasons, but for the very reason that they believe that life is something that we can mold as we see fit. And the truth is that there are tons and tons of devotees that still think like that. I know many initiated devotees in Bhakti Marga who think life is their canvas and they can make of it whatever they want. And I'm here to tell you, go ahead, you can do that. But that is not the teachings of our path, sorry to say. As, for example, demonstrated by the path of this verse of the Katha Upanishad, where he specifically says, you can choose either path you want, but by choosing one of them, you're losing the actual purpose of human life. You may achieve other purposes, but you don't achieve the actual purpose of human life. There was somebody who did exactly this recently. Rejected the divine purpose of his life to pursue other goals, right? And said, Guruji, I really feel like I want to do that. I have other ambitions and goals in life that I would like to fulfill. And Guruji says, okay. I'm not going to change your mind, go ahead. And then I spoke to Guruji, and Guruji's like, unbelievable. Unbelievable. That despite having knowledge of what your actual purpose of life is, you then choose to waste your life pursuing things that are not your actual purpose. But freedom is yours. You can choose to do it. But it is nonetheless a little unbelievable that one would choose consciously and with knowledge to not fulfill what you're actually supposed to do. And I remember him turning to me and saying, and the funniest thing of all is that the person says this to me and then says, but you're still my guru. And he says, if I'm still your guru, then explain to me again what my purpose is. Because I thought my purpose was to tell you what is right for you and then for you to follow. And if I can no longer tell you and you no longer follow, then am I really your guru and are you really my disciple? Fair question. I think we'll leave it there for today. Jai Gurudev. Om Shanti 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 Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Hari Om.